Hey guys, it's amazing to be here. Coming all the way from Los Angeles. This is actually, let's see, if I move this forward. This is a picture of the front of our offices in LA. And, this is Good as a project that I've worked on for about 6.5 years now. And it's really dealing with all of the same kinds of ideas that this Make a Difference, that MAD is all about. And it's amazing to come halfway around the world and see so many people engaged in the same ideas and trying to solve similar problems and figure out how we make a difference and do well in the world and have fun with it. So let's see. There we go. So Good is, as we've once described, it's a magazine, it's a website, it's videos, it's events for people who give a damn. And that definition has evolved a little bit over time, but I think that part is still true. And I'm curious, by a show of hands, have any of you guys seen Good before or read the website or any of our stuff? Cool. So some people, it's amazing that that the internet works. It makes it all the way around here. So this is a picture of our website from I think yesterday or the day before. So we cover these ideas of good, of how do we move the world forward, whether it's through business or design or technology or nonprofits, and we do it through news and video and all kinds of different things. And so I want to share with you guys a bit of the story of Good and how we got started and how we figured it out and where it's gone. And this sort of framework of understanding how things were and how things are and where we go from here, I think is one we constantly bring to ourselves at Good. And I think it's a sort of useful way to always check in with and how we think about things. So back in 2005, so I was about 24 back then, and that's when these conversations were starting amongst friends. And like I'm sure you guys know, we know the world is in a very amazing place. There's huge problems, and yet there's so much energy and innovation going on all the time, and how to make sense of that is something we were wrestling with. We had recently graduated college, and we wanted to do something good, but get to do what our passions were at the same time. And trying to figure that out, there aren't necessarily jobs to get into in that field, and it didn't feel that way back then. And yet, we started to look around and see that, these were examples from back then that were new at the time. Like the Prius was coming out in the US, and it was this first eco-friendly car. And there's the Livestrong bracelet, which was this cause-oriented bracelet from Lance Armstrong, the cyclist. And you were starting to see cause things get more interesting, and nonprofits. There was this nonprofit called Kiva that matches lenders with microloans in the developing nations. And there were really interesting things going on that felt different, and they felt new and exciting, and yet we felt like the conversation around Good in the US was one sort of stuck in this mode of the 1960s and the sort of social movements of back then, and we felt like there was this huge gap. And it was really frustrating to us. And so we decided, that was something we wanted to do something about. There was an opportunity there and something we felt really strongly about. And it turned into this notion of, almost for us, how do we rebrand Good? How do we reimagine it? We felt like if you talked about Good in the United States back then, as a notion, it felt like something, it was like eating your vegetables. It was like, it wasn't something it was something you had to do. It wasn't something you wanted to do. And yet we looked around and we were seeing interesting people and interesting new projects starting, very scattered, and they seemed like, something that was full of creativity and full of innovation and things that were really cool and powerful, and that's how we wanted to imagine Good. And it turned into this idea of creating a magazine. We felt like there was something to say there, a way to bring this together. And we looked around and we had seen things like Wired magazine in the US that in the 90s around technology had really reimagined how you talk about technology. And we wanted to try that for this idea of Good. And so this was the first issue, and this came out in 2006. And the cover says, "Blank like you give a damn." And it really asked of all of us, whatever it is that you want to do or whatever it is that you're passionate about, do it like you give a damn. And that was really the manifesto of good. Whether you love design or you love film or you love, law or medicine, like how do you do it like you give a damn? And it didn't have to be this choice between, going and following your sort of professional passions and doing good in the world. Like how do you bring those together? And that really was this notion that we wanted this new good, this reimagined good. It was not about altruism. It wasn't about renouncing your worldly possessions and going into the world to do good for others with no concern for yourself. It was this idea of, self-interest and society's needs, and how do we find the place where we can work together from there. And, there's these series of Venn diagrams I'll show, and they really are a big part of good because we felt like we needed new models. We needed new ways of talking about things that, we felt like we had been presented with these dual choices, and we didn't like either choice. We didn't like just self-interest or just society's needs. Like, we felt like there was an opportunity to do something that blended the two. And, to that end, there's this quote I love from Buckminster Fuller, who's the scientist and engineer in the mid-century in the US who created the geodesic dome and things like that. And he said that you can't change things by fighting the existing reality. We need to create new models that make the old ones obsolete. And I think that was really what good was out for, and also the thing that we sort of looked for in everything that we covered as a magazine. And these ideas of like not just competition in a capitalist sense, and not just sharing and cooperation in a socialist sense, but how do you blend the two? How do we create new business models? And for good, it was reimagining this idea of like, how do we create a for-profit company that also does good? And we this little chart was another diagram we made of like aiming in a new quadrant. So it's not just about making as much money as possible, or not just being a foundation or a for-profit and doing as much good, but how do you blend the two? Because that's really where we feel like true sustainability lies. And for us, one of the ways that we did this was, in the beginning, we created this Choose Good campaign. So when you subscribe to the magazine at the beginning, we actually partnered with 12 nonprofits that we thought were really interesting, and you could actually choose which one you wanted the whole of your subscription money to go to. And that was $20, which is what we felt like we could charge for the magazine. And, obviously we gave all of that money away, but as far as the business model worked, it actually helped us reach more people more efficiently than the conventional model of direct mail, of sending people mail to their mailbox that is unsolicited and that has a terrible conversion rate. So it was like an interesting, innovative way that helped us actually reach more people and do good at the same time. These other ideas that we were playing with was this notion of pragmatism and idealism. And I'll show some pieces from the magazine. So this was the opening spread of our first issue. There's a saying in the US sometimes that is America, love it or leave it, which people use to, if they don't like what you're saying, they may say that. And we sort of turn that around to America, love it or fix it. And it was this notion of like, again, like let's make things better. Let's be idealistic, but let's also figure out how to solve the problems at hand and not get caught up in dogma and not shut down debate in search of perfection. We also sort of really, as a brand, look to how do we create the space of both being entertaining and relevant. And for us, we did a lot of work in the space of infographics and how do you communicate in a really clever, interesting way. Visually charting complex things and breaking them down and making them fun to read. This was about donations, like candidates, imagining if candidates wore the donations they received, like sponsors on a NASCAR jersey. And more like visual stuff in this space, which really became a big part of good and what we became known for. This was charting happiness across the world. And also I think looking at this idea of like how do we have fun and be serious at the same time. And an example I'll show there which is not something that we did, but something we've covered. There's an organization in the US called 826, which is a literacy and tutoring agency, and they've done this very fun thing where they have storefronts in a variety of cities, and all the storefronts have these fun fronts. There's a pirate supply store in San Francisco, and here in Los Angeles, it's a time travel mart. And you walk in and it's actually a store like that, and then there's like a back door where they do tutoring, and it sort of mixes this sense of fun with a real important task of tutoring kids, and it helps get the young people in the neighborhood involved too, because it's more fun than just going down to some bland location and doing your duty as a tutor. So let's see. And so I think where that's led us over time is in doing these ideas and playing things out as we started as a magazine, and we started to reach more people, and that evolved into media, and doing video and doing events and all kinds of stuff like that. And then in 2010, in the media landscape, you do a lot of work with companies, and that was getting more interesting and more elaborate, and it actually turned into a place where we spun off a whole agency that now does just work with companies and bringing these ideas of good to them, like how do we help Pepsi do good? How do we help IBM do good? And now we're also getting more and more involved in technology and how do we create tools that enable this kind of behavior. So just quickly, this is sort of, again, like with the website, we've gotten a little bit more news-oriented. We've developed sections of big issues, like education is one that we follow a lot in the US. We've also overall become a lot more collaborative in how we've worked. So through media, we've done some interesting projects. This was about kind of crowdsourcing and how do we imagine better streets in the US. And so this was a project where we sort of worked with a think tank who does these issues and defining what does a livable street look like, and then worked with the community to get them to create these scenarios in their area. And we ended up with a great sort of collection of streets around the US reimagined and reinvented. We're also doing a lot more that is, this is a contest that we ran with a partner in the education space where we're doing grant making and a lot more activation in this sense. So what started as content and media has really become a lot more diverse as we've built this brand and finding ways to reach people in new ways. And then on the technology side, this has turned into some projects where this is one, Good Maker, where we're creating a platform for crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, and how do we kind of get grants to really interesting projects and let people come in and do that. We're sort of created Good Finder, which is a social news component to Good. So opening Good up and letting it be much more open and collaborative to how people can contribute to what it is and finding the best stories and rating the best stuff to the top. So it's not just this editorial effort that's based out of Los Angeles. Some of you I've met have seen the email that we do. So we do a daily good daily newsletter, which is like one good thing a day, and it's one good interesting idea, sort of showcasing some of the best thinking in the space. And as I mentioned, getting into this agency space, we've done a lot of work. This is some stuff we did with IBM, which was, again, in the sort of media and content space. But we also did a program with Pepsi where we helped them develop this huge program that ran for the last 2 years, where they actually gave away about $20 million through an online platform for identifying great community projects. And we helped them develop this and worked with them on how they ran it. And it was a really exciting thing to be a part of and get inside of a really big company that kind of wants to do good but doesn't totally know where to start, and figure out how do you do that? How do you help them turn that ship? And so with that, part of us all here, the world has changed so much in these past 5 years. And what I think started when we were at the beginning was something that not a lot of people got, but there were little bits and pieces where people understood this idea, is now all over. There's things like MAD here in Hong Kong, and TEDx has sort of spanned the globe and a very similar sensibility. And I would mention, I was talking with Ada the other night, and she said the values that you guys have are the values that we have. And it's very true. These things are now global. And I think with that, we're always looking at this idea with good from this entrepreneurial sense of what would we do if we were starting from scratch. We know we have our existing businesses, and we know how the media is evolving and how the agency is evolving, but it's important for us to always think about, what would we do right now? Like, what does the world need from good right now? And for us, it's thinking about, how do we connect this global community that now is a global community in a way that it maybe wasn't around good years ago, and how do we enable them to actually do things? So, that's stuff that's on our mind and hopefully comes out in next projects that we have. And I'll leave with this, which is one of my favorite new sort of quotes, which is that possibility is determined not by opinion, but by attempt. And I think that's really what entrepreneurship is all about, is just getting out there and doing it. And it's something that's exciting, the energy in this room, and I encourage all of you to just try it. The last thing I'll share is that this is a photo of us back in 2005, I guess. That's actually me in the middle with like long hair and a mustache. And someone asked the other day, like, what makes us qualified to be change makers or, to be entrepreneurs? And I guess the good and the bad news is I don't think anything makes us qualified. I think we just have to get out there and do it. And it's through doing it that we become qualified, because we have to figure out our own paths as entrepreneurs. No one will have done what you've wanted to do before. And so it's just getting out there and doing it and learning, and from that, really great things happen. So thank you.